missed the budget.
Okay, we're live. Okay. Good morning, if you wouldn't mind.
Madam Chair, may I do some introductions? We have a group here from the Minnesota Intercounty Association. It is a group of about, 15 counties in Minnesota who have grouped together to follow legislative efforts and to try to influence state policy at that level. They tend to be counties that are similar in size to Crow Wing. We are a regional center county, and so they tend to be collar counties and those throughout greater Minnesota that are similar in size to us. And that size does matter because some of our issues are not the same as, say, a Hennepin County that is much larger, or they're not the same as, say, Traverse County, which is much smaller. And so this organization, I think, does a nice job for representing those interests of the counties that are our size. We get materials from them on a regular basis. I get the session updates that I use to keep you guys updated. Commissioner Barrows, Commissioner Franzine serve on the MICA Board of Directors, and so they are intimately involved in that process as well. And then I tend to use the MICA summary at the end of session, and I want to, for the record, state I'm impressed that you could get this session into this few pages because the end of session report is about that thick.
Yes,
and as you know, I've been trying to keep you updated and probably woefully inadequately. And so these folks are here today to help fill in the gaps that I may have left. I'm sure they are many.
Go ahead.
So,
All right. Well, thank you, Administrator Houle. Thank you for your work and support and guidance also to the organization throughout the year. And to Chair Francine and Commissioner Barrows and all of the commissioners, appreciate the opportunity to be here today. It is a beautiful courthouse, as you all know, and it was a lovely drive up. And thank you, Commissioner Franzine and Barrows, for your service on the MICA board. We do have a lot to cover, to be honest. We will not try to cover all of it in this meeting. We will cover the highlights. It was a great session for counties. It was a great session for the MICA platform, and I'll start with the high level of the state budget here in a bit. But you know that a lot of the work that county governments do is work that is done on behalf of the state of Minnesota or directed by the state of Minnesota through mandates and other parameters. And for a long period of time, our conversation at the legislature has been how those costs have not been fully funded of those state mandates. And so this legislative session, the legislature did some really good work at catching up and bringing up to speed significantly or very close to fully bringing up to speed the funding for many of those programs in a way that will be really helpful, I think, to moderating the upward pressure that had been accumulating for a long time on property taxes. It's not going to solve everything, but a lot of good work for county governments. So just to talk about the high level, you may remember that the 2022 session ended with a fair amount of inaction, despite a state budget surplus at about $12 billion carried forward. So we started this legislative session with a $17.5 billion surplus, which was historic and unprecedented by pretty much every standard in Minnesota. There were within the general fund, and I'll talk about that first, there were significant increases in revenue as well as decreases in revenue. On net, the general fund experienced just under a $2 billion reduction in tax revenues with some one-time tax reductions and refunds to individuals, as well as a greatly expanded child care tax credit and other income tax provisions that we don't follow as directly, but we're part of that package. But a $14 billion increase in spending. Property tax relief often reflects that spending in the state budget. So that spending included $973 million for various components of tax relief, which will be part of my conversation in the next slide. As far as the detailed numbers on this page, I'm really just going to focus as we start to think now towards next legislative session on that blue line at the bottom, and particularly the balance number for fiscal 24-25. Even after all of this activity, The legislative session ended with a positive balance of $1.5 billion on the bottom line. Monthly revenue collections have continued to come in, not as much above forecast as they had been prior to last session, but they're still coming in above forecast. So the state remains in a healthy budget condition as we look forward to the next legislative session and hopefully the expectation of another comprehensive bonding bill.
Matt, can I ask a couple, Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Can I ask just a couple, 2-3 questions quickly that, okay, so $17 billion in the way you were explaining it. So does that mean, I know when I was there, the budget was 30 billion. I think it's 50 billion now, isn't it, or how much?
Madam Chair and Commissioner, you can see it on the page if you look at start with the forecast 24-25 number and drop down to spending. So the base spending was $55.493 billion for the biennium prior to legislative action. So it's about a 25% increase in spending.
Okay, so then my
Yep.
question is when the next biennium comes, is that the starting point, the new number? Am I?
Yeah, it's a good
So,
question. He's on it.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, that is a good question because a significant amount of the spending was one time.
Right.
With a one-time surplus. So as you can see there, continuing to read across that page, spending goes up with legislative action for 24-25 from $55.5 billion to $69.5 billion. The base then drops back down to $59.4 billion for 26-27 when that one-time spending is removed.
Yeah, I am. So 59 billion would be the new starting point, so it looks like it's gonna be.
I apologize, sorry. I have to go, that was the base going in. It drops down to 67.5 billion. I have to go out to the next number. So it doesn't drop back quite as much as I had just said. So we ended the session with 69 billion in spending, 69.5 in 24-25. It drops down to 67.5 billion in 26-27.
Because even though there was 5 billion in one-time savings, there's also inflation that's added in there, so that's going to affect that number too.
But the budget is still is going to go up just dramatically. And I mean, it's not gonna, if it was $55.5 billion, the starting point isn't gonna be 57 billion, it's gonna be 67 billion.
Correct.
Wow, okay. And then what about, just 2 questions. I know when I was there, the cash flow account, they said, I can remember the guy with the big head that was super smart. I can't remember his name. You know who I mean?
I could think of several people who you might mean, but I'm not gonna, I might not answer that question.
There are several people in St.
But the cash flow account was 500 million. I'm just wondering if you know what that is, and then how much in reserve is there?
Madam Chair and Commissioner, the cash flow account is 350 million. That's been the longstanding number, and it remains there. And then if you look at the reserves are also on this page. They are at the healthiest point I think they've ever been in the states. Certainly the 30 so years I've been in this line of work. They're $3.2 billion at the end of legislative session.
Okay. All right. I'm good for now.
So moving on to the next slide, let me talk about some of the ways that shows up for counties, and there are many. One of them, and I just want to sort of give a perspective, given your questions, Commissioner Coring, of the number of ways, because the budget did go up quite a bit, the number of ways that also plays out for counties. So you have something like county program aid. County program aid was, prior to this session, was basically at the same level, the same nominal dollar level as it was at 20 years ago. It would have been $150 million per year more had it simply kept pace with the cost of local government costs rising. The House led the action, and the Senate supported, and the governor had proposed increases in county program aid. Counties asked for that $150 million, and in the end of the day, the legislature increased county program aid by $80 million annually, which is the largest single year-to-year increase other than recovering from budget cuts that the legislature has ever made in the program. So takes a giant step towards getting that program back to what the historic relationship had been with the state on county program aid. Public safety aid, one-time money of $300 million, $90 million of which goes to county and tribes, $88 million to counties. Local housing aid is a new dedicated statewide housing aid program. So all counties will receive some amount of annual aid that will support local housing efforts. $15.3 million for each of the first 2 years, and then because there is less money in the tails, drops down to $6.8 million. Soil and water conservation districts now have a permanent foundational funding from the state general fund. In SWCD aid, $15 million for 2 years, and then it drops down to 12. You might recall that this had been a year-to-year sort of budget-to-budget one-time activity from the Clean Water Fund. It's now a set appropriation from the general fund. SCORE grants was a
They had also sought levy authority, correct?
They had also thought levy authority. Over the years, there had been quite a number of different solutions in order to provide permanent base funding for soil and water conservation districts. This now provides that base funding from the state general fund.
And I think that's probably better than the levy authority from our perspective.
I would think so.
Yep.
SCORE grants, Commissioner Barrows has worked on this in support of the message counties have been bringing to the Capitol, and others. We have been trying for quite a number of years to get some portion of the solid waste management tax revenues that go into the general fund dedicated instead to the purposes they were always intended, redirected to SCORE grants to counties, and so we did make progress on that this year. About $3.5 million annually. It'll actually be about a 20% increase in SCORE grants for each county. And then there was quite an increase across the board in monies that will go directly to direct relief for homeowners and renters. So a one-time increase of 20.57% in homeowner and renter refunds for calendar year 23. That's increases relative to for the refunds based on taxes paid in 2022. Then there will also be more benefit that is credit and refunds that are derived from those programs for the renters, in large part because it's now going to be moved onto the income tax form instead of a separate form with a different definition of income that will result in higher refunds. And the homeowner refund program has also been boosted up. Then in the interest of time, I'll just touch on that the market value homestead exclusion was expanded about 25%, which will provide some tax-based relief to homeowners as their values have been rising faster than most other classes of property. That exclusion had been static since 2011, despite home values continuing to climb each year, and so that will re-baseline that in an expansion of the senior deferral and a significant increase in broadband funding as well. The next slide, and I am going to apologize, we have just a little snafu on this slide that I didn't catch. Anoka County's data was not intended to be on this chart, but it doesn't actually interfere with the accurate numbers for Crow Wing County. So this gives a flavor for what those provisions that I talked about and some others mean for Crow Wing. $680,000 annually in increased county program aid. I didn't mention PILT, but there was a significant increase from $2 to $3 an acre in other natural resource lands, which is a large category of lands for Crow Wing and St. Louis and our membership in particular. So we estimate about $141,000 annually there. one-time money of $1.5 million, and then, of course, you see the local housing aid, the SWCD aid, SCORE grants, and I'll get to it, but as a Community Corrections Act county, I'll touch on it a little bit later, although Carly Stark wasn't able to join us today, but significant $43 million increase in county program in community corrections funding, which will mean just under $1.3 million for Crow Wing County.
So a question, so on, I guess, any of this stuff, let's just say public safety, one-time money, 1.5 million. So is there any strings attached to that on how we are required to spend that? Do you know the answer to that?
Commissioner, it's a good question. That is highlighted, summarized here a bit. It's pretty broad.
Okay.
There are some parameters for sure that the legislature put in, but it can be used for, any public safety costs related to hiring, related to recruitment. Local governments have been facing challenges filling and retaining and filling positions. I know that there's been considerations there. It can be used for equipment. It cannot be used for the construction of new police buildings,
Right.
departments, that sort of thing, but can be used for vehicles and equipment. We're going to talk later. There was a little bit of money put in for armored radio systems, not nearly as much as counties need, but this money could also be used for that purpose, so it's fairly broad.
So did we just get the money and then we have to account for all the money that's spent to make sure that it's spent on that, or I'm probably drilling down too far?
Yeah, there were. What I would say to that is, I would give you a twofold answer. One is there was not a lot of reporting there's no reporting requirements actually that I know of specifically. I think that there would be, the second point would be, I would anticipate there would be a general expectation as any of the public entities receiving the money across the state that you would be able to, report publicly if asked how you utilize the money.
Question for you, PILT payments, do you know the answer? That $141, do we just put that in the general fund and we can just, or is that restricted money that we have to spend?
Goes into the public land management account.
Okay.
What it means is it helps
Well,
offset our forestry
can you
costs.
just go back? I just missed one. What the homeless prevention aid, that looks like a minus? So-
Sure, that was the homeless prevention aid is a aid that the legislature created 2 years ago. It's an 8-year pilot at this particular time. It was $20 million initially. When the legislature enacted that, the intent of the author had been to include tribal governments in some of that distribution. That didn't happen. The fix to make that happen was going to happen in the 2022 tax bill, which, as we know, the 2022 session came to an end without a number of supplemental bills passing. And so this is the reallocation of some of that money to include tribal governments, and so everyone's allocation adjusted downward a little bit, and that's that reflection there.
Makes sense.
And we're ready for transportation if there's no more questions. I'll be here, of course.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Always nice to be in Crow Wing County. I would like to give you my report on transportation. I'll just start by saying it was essentially a record year in most categories. A number of things have gone on, and the impact of it will be here for years in a positive way. So let me take you through it. First, as an overview on the top, we had about 4 major things happen. There was a transportation funding budget bill of a $1 billion with a B. A major capital investment bonding bill, which included $1.1 billion in cash, that combined with $1.5 billion in bonds for a $2.6 billion impact, the largest ever. In addition to that, there was just under $600 million in trunk highway bonds over the next 3 years, Combined, that adds up to $3.8 billion in ongoing dedicated revenue for transportation over the next 4 years. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on each of those three. Before I do that, though, I want to mention two things. Number one, just to get it out there up front, this will average out over the next 4 years to about a 15% per year increase for transportation for Crow Wing County. And then I think it's important to take you through what turned out to be in the end 5 major ongoing permanent tax increases, revenue increases for transportation that total somewhere north of $500 million, which was a goal that was established a decade ago, so it finally got done all in one bill. As you know from previous reports, we've spent a lot of time over the last 4, 5, 6 years telling you about things that we worked on that didn't happen in this area for political reasons, but it all came together. So let me just quickly take you through it. In terms of the transportation funding increases that will be ongoing into the future. There was a registration fee increase that totaled $240 million. MVEST was increased from up to 6.875%, which will equal $40 million for fiscal year 24-25. Maybe the surprise of the session, after almost 2 decades of talking about it, the gas tax, the fuel tax, was indexed, capped at 3%, has the equivalency when it's done of about 5 cents a gallon, equals $155 million for fiscal year 24-25. There is a new fee modeled after a law in Colorado called a delivery fee, where there'll be a 50-cent fee on packages valued at $100 or more, and that will raise $60 million annually beginning in fiscal year 25. And then there's the sales tax on auto parts, which was originally implemented in 2017 at about 50%. This will complete the transfer over a 10-year phase-in and will result in $200 million annually after the phase-in is complete. Combined, significant new money for transportation on an ongoing basis, something that a lot of us, including your board, have worked on for many, many years. So let me take you back then to a quick look into the details of the 3 major bills that passed. The Omnibus Transportation Budget Bill had a value of about $1 billion. The interesting thing about it was $850 million of it was spent in just 7 areas, so let me take you through those. There was a transfer to the Trunk Highway Fund of $152.6 million. I should have mentioned up front that the session got off to a very positive start with the passage of a single bill in January that was valued at $316 million in state money to be used as a match for the federal infrastructure bill that will be flowing into Minnesota over the next 4 years. And that was a big bipartisan commitment to get those state matches in place. So in addition to that initial $316 million inside the Omnibus Transit Budget Bill was an additional $216 million for a total of about $530 million. Essentially all of the state matches, which are roughly 20%, are in place to receive the federal dollars over the next 4 years as they flow into Minnesota. That will have a value of roughly $4 to $5 billion, predominantly for roads and bridges and also for transit. So then in addition to those, the NLX trail, or the NLX rail line from Minneapolis to Duluth was given $194 million, which actually was the request. I know that politically some people like it, some people don't, but this amount of state money is essentially going to guarantee the federal matches necessary to complete this particular project and have it running over the next couple of years. There was an additional $36 million for county roads and bridges, $50 million for the Blue Line LRT, $40 million for Greater Minnesota Transit, and $131.8 million in what they're calling named projects, what we used to call earmarks. And you'll hear a lot about that as you work your way through these transportation bills. There was a number of earmarks that have significant value to the people that receive them around the state.
Steve,
Yep,
transit funding. County transit systems funding went up, correct?
yeah, 40 million.
What we're hearing from MinDOT is that their participation rate is going to go down in our transit system. So I think it probably has to do with ARPA and CARES money that they were using. But they were up about in the 93% range covering costs. And what we're being told is they are going to return to the historic 85%.
Right.
And so it's, you know, we made cuts to the system to mimic what MinDOT cut to the system. And so I'm trying to square the increase in funding. It's probably inflationary costs would be my guess, but that's not our experience.
We'll have to look into it.
Yeah. If you
Thank you.
would, that would be great, Steve, and then just let me know.
Okay.
That'd be great. Thank you.
All right, so that's the transportation budget bill. Let me take you to the capital bonding bill, which I referenced earlier as a total of $2.6 billion. About $500 million of that went to transportation, so let me give you the details. In terms of local roads, undesignated, $78.95 million. In terms of, again, named road projects, earmarks, an additional $146.42 million, for a total of $243 million. The MICA platform position called for $250, and so basically the platform position was accepted in the end by the process, and I can't tell you how pleased we are about that. It's the first time that's happened in the years that I've worked here. We try to peg a number that's realistic based on the kinds of projects that are in the queue line, that are engineered and ready to go, but for the money. And this is the first time we basically received the money that we had researched and declared to be eligible, and we're very happy about that. In terms of local bridges, county bridges, undesignated, $67 million. Again, named bridge projects, earmarks, an additional $41.9 million for $126 million. That essentially meets the marker that was set out by the governor. He called for $125 million. The process ended up at $126. So once again, a lot of work, a lot of good work will be done on local bridges over the next few years, and we're very pleased about that. I will just touch on a few other items that might be of interest. The highway railroad grade crossings received $3.6 million. Port development, $18 million. Safe routes to school, $2.4 million. Active transportation, $1.2 million. Minnesota rail service improvement, $9.6 million. And an additional $3 million to Greater Minnesota Transit. As I said earlier, the total, to be specific, is $493.714 million. I should also mention that there was $12 million in bonds that went to the local road wetland replacement program. The request had been $18 million in bonds, $7 million in cash. So that is an issue that affects all the counties around the state, and that will be, we know already, a priority item for us in the 2024 platform. And I'll leave it at that. I want to mention the trunk highway bonds. I referenced it earlier as $599 million, and here's where those dollars went. $87.4 million to MnDOT facilities around the state, $153 million to corridors of commerce, I think a program we're all getting pretty familiar with. An additional $200 million for state road construction. And again, $166.15 million for named projects, earmarks around the state. That totals $599.2 million. So significant progress in all of our basic areas, and we're very pleased about it. And so that would conclude my remarks, except to also say that we've enjoyed a collegial relationship with your county engineer over the years, and expect that to continue. So I would conclude and be happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair, just a couple of quick questions for Steve. So I think I know the answer to this. Oops, that's a different slide. Can you go back to the other slide? Where, delivery fee, I think I know the answer to this. So like when I'm getting my Amazon packages delivered from UPS or FedEx, it's 50 cents a package. Is that what that means?
If the value of the package is over $100.
Oh, okay, okay.
You spent some time down there in the Senate, so I think you'll maybe relate to this. This was a kind of a rare example of what turned out to be a pretty big law that passed, that at the beginning of the session, just about nobody was thinking about except one legislator in the House. And she had done a lot of work on it, a lot of research. She had sort of been commissioned to go try to find these sorts of things by Chair Hornstein. And she found it in Colorado, did a lot of work on it, and it passed the House. I don't believe it was actually even heard in the Senate, and then became a big negotiable item in the conference committee. In the process, it was originally a bill that would have raised $200 million, included lots of different types of items that through the process got kind of winnowed out. And this ended up being the final package, but it does represent a brand new source of revenue for transportation. And that's kind of how it came about.
And then the other question is I still watch when the legislative session is going on, and I saw something where is Senator Pappas the bonding chair?
Yes.
Senator Pappas was having a meeting, and it wasn't going too well. The Republicans were mad because she pulled their bills off, and then they kept asking her questions, and then ultimately she says, well, if you're not going to vote for the bill, I'm not going to put your stuff in there. So, she made it sound like the Republicans voted down the bonding bill. Which bonding bill would that have been? Because you said the bonding bill was passed. Does that make
Well, the
sense?
bonding bill, as I think you'll recall from your years down there, is almost always a work in progress. And
Yeah.
whoever the bonding chairs are, any day of the month, any month of the year, you can go to them, and on that day, if you asked them to, they'd produce a bonding bill. They've always got one in motion.
Right.
And they're always running around the state checking out projects. I mean, they do their research. And what they're waiting for is to get a number from the leadership and an okay to get moving. But under the Constitution, to pass a bonding bill, unlike a conventional bill, you need a 60% vote. So you don't pass bonding bills usually, well, almost never, without a bipartisan thing. So
If I would just add, Madam Chair, Commissioner, that reference likely would have been at the point in session you're referring to, that there wasn't, remember that 2022 is a traditional bonding year, and that session ended without a bonding bill. There was an effort that got underway fairly early in the 2023 session to pass a bonding bill that was very similar to the bonding bill that had been largely assembled towards the end of the 2022 session. The House pulled together the bipartisan votes to do that. That bill went over to the Senate. Shortly thereafter, that bill was voted on in the Senate, and it did not garner the bipartisan vote needed to pass it early in session. And so then it went back, as Steve was referring, bonding bills really never die until the final gavel comes down at the end of session, and in the end of the session, we did get a bonding bill.
Okay, that makes total sense. All right, thank you.
I would add only one thing, because his recollection is 100% perfect. There was one additional feature this year that maybe has never existed before, at least for a bonding bill this size, which is they had the cash to just go do it as a conventional bill and leave the Republicans behind. Nobody, I think, especially the Democratic leadership, wanted that to be the result. But I'm thinking that in that particular meeting that you happen to see with the dialogue that you heard, inherent in all of that was a subtle threat that, get on board at some point, because if you don't, we're doing it anyway, and we can pay for it with cash. I don't think anybody wanted that to be the result, and it wasn't, but that was part of it too.
them up. Madam Chair and Commissioners, I'm Nancy Zaleski, and I do both Public Health and Human Services for MICA, and it's a pleasure to be here. I was telling Commissioner Barrows earlier that I've been here all week and staying at a resort on Gull Lake that's in your county, the right side of the lake, so just want you to know
Come
that.
early, come often. We appreciate it.
We do, we're hanging out. So Human Services also was, big discussion this year. There were two bills with separate targets. There was an omnibus Human Services bill, and then there was a separate Health and Human Services bill. Again, two different committees, two different targets. I'm going to start with the Human Services omnibus bill. This is chaired by Senator John Hoffman and Representative Mohammed Noor. In the end, they appropriated $1.35 billion in new spending to DHS in the first biennium and $1.56 in the second. Included in this measure is something that we've been working on for a very, very long time, and it relates to the county cost share for folks that are, in this case, civilly committed as mentally ill and dangerous, are awaiting, they're at the Anoka Metropolitan Regional Treatment Center, AMRTC as an example. The hospital determines they don't need that level of care, but they're waiting for a bed at, say, St. Peter's. So it's one state-operated facility to another. Counties have no ability to effectuate that transfer. So we've been paying 100% of the cost, however, for a very long time on this. This is a work group that we've been working on for a long time, and I want to call out Tammy Lewick, who's been really active in that group, and doing a great job on it. In the end, they waived the county cost share for 2 years, and that will save counties $13.2 million over the 2 years. And again, this is a portion of those folks that are in the direct care and treatment facility. It's specific to mentally ill and dangerous.
Folks, you will recall hearing Tammy refer to that as state-operated services.
Yeah,
That's how she refers to it, and these are the charges that we've gotten when somebody no longer meets medical criteria at one of the state hospitals. There's two parts of the state hospital, one that does the medical criteria and the other one that, I don't know if they do the psych services or whatever, but sometimes one of them will say, you can get out, and the other one will say no, and then they start charging us. Which is it?
correct.
So Tammy has, I know, been a leader among counties working on this because it has hit our budget so substantially. Her work has already saved us a great deal. We're not going to benefit quite as much from this because she already had saved us a great deal. It's a good thing, though.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. Just to put it in context, the per diem was $1,300 a day, so it adds up quickly, and those rates just went up to about $2,100 a day. So this $13.2 million that counties are not going to be paying are going to be quickly absorbed. Just want to mention that tied to this is the legislature established a 48-hour task force related to this issue. The legislature, several years ago, Commissioner Coring, you might have been there when it was determined that folks that are sitting in jails should be kind of bumped to the top to get into the AMRTC facility. So they established what was called the 48-hour rule, where they want them placed in that time. That has not been possible because of a lack of resources. And so the state has been sued by, I think, 16 cases the Attorney General mentioned that he's defending. So, excuse me, they appointed this task force to kind of figure it out. So this is a big deal for a lot of folks. The 48-hour task force came from the county sheriffs and the county attorneys associations worked on that. In terms of who... In terms of who is on it, it is chaired by Attorney General Keith Ellison and Commissioner Jody Harpstead, the DHS Commissioner. Counties have 2 seats on that, one commissioner, Commissioner Terrell Clark from Stearns County, and then we have a Human Services Director, Angie Youngerberg from Blue Earth County, is sitting on that group. They want to resolve this in a very short period of time. They want to report by next February. So they've been working on this, have met once, and my understanding is they'll be meeting again in September to try and figure out how this is going to work.
Chair Nancy, that issue in particular, we've talked about here before. We got a visual tour of some of what the folks in our jail endure if they are in an acute mental health crisis. And just sitting in a cell all day long, padded, nothing else in there but a toilet. An acute mental health crisis. Oftentimes, their behaviors are behaviors that cause great deal of cleanup. I'll just leave it at that. 27 days. That's criminal.
Right.
What we're doing to those people is criminal. We should be ashamed. 27 days, someone sitting in isolation because we can't muster a state bed to treat them. And we know we had a state hospital system. We had one here. So
Right.
instead of sitting in our state hospital across the way, they're sitting in our county jail, untreated, because we're not a mental health facility. They have got to fix that.
You're right.
It is
Madam Chair, it's
terrible
been an
what we're doing.
ongoing challenge trying to figure out the resource, it's a resource issue, and hopefully something good comes out of this, because it's certainly recognized. I would also just mention that these dollars that counties are paying for the do not meet medical criteria days go into the general fund. They don't even get into the system, into the mental health system where those dollars are so needed, so.
At some point, counties ought to consider joining the lawsuits that are being filed against the state, because it is criminal.
Thank you. Going on then to a few other things that are in the Hoffman-Noor bill, they did provide rate increases for a number or variety of direct services providers, everything from adult day services, PCA services, certain disability waiver services, you can see the list, and also NEMT and ambulance services rates were increased as well. So that was the bulk of the spending in the Hoffman-Noor bill. Then moving on is the Health and Human Services Omnibus Bill, and that is chaired by Senator Melissa Wicklund from Bloomington and Representative Tina Liebling from Rochester area. That bill appropriates $1.4 billion to DHS in new spending for the first biennium and 1.5 for the next, 26-27. There's also additional funding for the Department of Health, MDH funding of $284 million in the first biennium, $233 in the second. The legislature did create 2 new state agencies that we're going to be working with. One working with the direct care and treatment, the state operated services issue that we're talking about, is there's going to be a separate agency for that. The second is the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. The plan is to take existing employees and resources and move these folks to the new agencies. Those resources will come from the Departments of Human Services, Health, Education, and Public Safety. That's a ways out. We're trying to figure out what that's going to look like, but a lot of folks are to be transferred from the DHS to those agencies.
Madam Chair, if I might, Nancy, do you have an opinion on whether that's going to affect any quality change in the care of those individuals?
Madam Chair and Commissioner, I think it's too early to say. We're always concerned about, creating new agencies with a new, commissioner and all the bureaucracy that goes with it. But I think in the case of the direct care and treatment, it may be a good thing because they now get in the queue for the DHS budget, which is, huge. They'll have their own budget, their own commissioner, their own staff, and I'd like to think that this is the priority. I mean, then we just have to get these folks out of jails and create these beds that are needed for treatment. So I think potentially it's a good thing. Too early to say for sure, but hopeful. Moving on, they did put a lot of money into IT investments this year, $130 million plus. There's money for service delivery transformation. There is money for METS functionality, which is the green screen technology that county workers are wrestling with every day. We're hopeful that that's going to improve. Also money for the MMIS modernization, MNsure technology, and others. So they did put money into, and that was a priority for us for a really long time as well. Also, pretty significant investments in behavioral health. They put $4 million in seed money into the 988 National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. After that, it shifts to a fee on telecommunications or cell phone users. They put additional funding into mobile crisis grants, established funding for tribal mobile crisis response teams, School-linked behavioral grants received quite a good investment, as well as first episode psychosis. There's a grant for the Center for Rural Behavioral Health, which is housed at MSU in Mankato, a rate increase for mental health services, and I also want to mention the bonding bill. For the last several bonding sessions, there have been $10 million put aside for behavioral health crisis facilities, so those are starting to get put up in different regions of the state. $10 million is not a lot, but it's at least a sign that they are taking, they're paying attention to the need here. Childcare, they provided additional basic sliding fee assistance of $30 million per biennium. They put $25 million into the Family First Prevention Program, which includes kinship navigator services, family assessment response, and evidence-based practice grants. In terms of economic supports, there was a general assistance benefit increase for the first time in a long time, and they put pretty substantial money into food security. Moving on to public health. Again, pretty good investments there. A lot of these things were left on the table in 2022, so they kind of started with this. There's $25 million, the first biennium for emergency preparedness. They created a public health response contingency account of $2.5 million, so if we have another crisis, that money will be sitting there. $23 million into public health system transformation, $21 million into the Healthy Beginnings, Healthy Grants program. They provided money for lead remediation in both schools and child care centers. And they put about $3.2 million for this biennium into the AmeriCorps Heading Home Corps, and that is for folks that are facing housing challenges. Moving on, other things that will help counties, I would say, is they have a continuous medical assistance eligibility for children now. Medical assistance co-pays are completely eliminated starting in January of 2024. And there's an increase for the MFIP housing benefit, COLA. One thing that was discussed, particularly on the House side this year, was looking at different things relating to healthcare affordability. Chair Liebling talked about, wanting to carve out drug purchasing from managed care by moving it to the fee-for-service program. That's an example. Also looking at eliminating managed care altogether, universal health care, et cetera. In the end, there was language to study that, and they'll be coming back in the next session to continue that discussion. Also want to highlight that early in session, the legislature passed a bill, I think it was the end of February, 1st of March, that provided $36 million to counties to unwind the public health emergency related to COVID. We're now in the process, county workers in the process of looking at 1.5 million applications relative to getting them recertified for medical assistance. So those dollars were provided to counties. I believe you're starting to receive them from what I'm hearing. Those dollars should be coming in. They also provided some money for DHS for that, and MNsure as well. With that, I want to call out your staff as well. I work very closely with Kara Griffin, Kara Terry, Tammy Luke, I mentioned. They're great. They're always just a phone call away, attending all of our meetings, and the meetings where we meet in person, we always are together there, and they're quite an asset, not just for your county, but for counties as a whole. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions.
Madam Chair, if I might have a couple things, Nancy. The first one is about MMIS. Is that an upgrade or is that a replacement? The 10 million there, throwing at that.
Commissioner, I don't know if it's replacing it. The MMIS, it says modernization, so I'm not sure what that looks like at this point.
Okay, I know for years, back in my time, it was archaic at that time, and they couldn't tie it to the other programs that they utilize. So I'm assuming that they couldn't find a replacement for it, so I'm assuming that they're looking at trying to fix those problems and just so they can integrate it with the other programs would be my
Madam Chair and
guess.
Commissioner, yes, that is the goal, to try and simplify. We've been working on that for a long time. That's the goal. We just didn't have the money to do it.
Right.
So,
And I hope 10 million's enough, because when they changed the state accounting system, I mean, that was millions after millions after millions to try to get to something. Finally, I think they bought something off the shelf, and then all of us in the accounting world had to figure out the workarounds, because they weren't going to design it to what our real needs were. So, interesting. Second thing is on the 48-hour rule. I would ask, and I forgot to say this at the meeting the other day, but DHS promised a transportation component back in the day, and you know, when they were shutting down the treatment centers. That has never been followed through either. And I would like to see the 48-hour rule try to address that issue along with how they administer the 48-hour rule. And if you remember, that's, you know, I think of the small police stations, you think of Sabika, where they got maybe an officer and a half on their staff, and somebody goes into a crisis and they have to transport them to a CBHH or to Anoka or somewhere. They send their only officer, so now there's virtually, other than the sheriff's department, no coverage in those communities. And I heard that over and over from some of the small communities. So they originally, DHS, promised that they would have a transportation system developed at their cost to move these individuals experiencing those kinds of situations around the state, wherever they needed to go. So just another point that's kind of been lost in the course of some of the issues with the mental health problem. So,
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner. I'm meeting with the MICA Human Services Directors this week, and so I will bring that up and see if that can be part of that discussion. Thank you.
as this board knows, I said our sheriff's department should bill DHS for it to raise that rhetoric about how to deal with some of these issues, and they're big issues, and the 48-hour rule is also tied to not just the beds in the CBHH system and the Anoka facility in St. Peter. It's also tied to not having beds in the community for the ones that need to go for care there but don't meet the needs of being in the more hospital setting. And there aren't those beds, and they're not incentivizing the development of those beds. So, you know, it doesn't all just end at the state-run system. There's got to be some privates out there. There's got to be some other groups that address in the community those issues to try to keep them out of the hospital system. So, enough from me. I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
Every time you guys come, I have to open my mouth about mental health.
We want
so
that.
I apologize.
In the words of Sue Abderholden, the mental health system has just not been completely built. I mean, it's just an ongoing challenge, and we need resources, we need dollars.
It's as simple as how many beds were available in the state hospital system and how many beds are available now with the CBHHs. It's less. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. It's the number of beds is smaller than it used to be. They haven't built the system. It was a great model. Get out of institutionalized settings. Get them into community-based settings. It's the right model. They just didn't finish building it.
Correct.
And they need to finish building it. They shut down the bed before they built the bed.
Right.
So, Madam Chair, a couple of questions. Nancy, under your, excuse me, under your corrections and public safety, you've got a bullet point there that says Community Supervision Advisory Committee. So what is that? Is that like a local committee that we would have, or what is that all about?
Yeah, Commissioner and Madam Chair and Commissioner Corey, and I'll start to that slide. Let me just, as we transition into answering that question, let me just say I really appreciate, I think we all do, the comments and the questions, because as much as this is a report out to all of you, we start thinking about the 2024 session. So it's really, for us, it's very helpful to be out with our member counties, hearing what the unfinished business is, hearing what the issues are to continue working on at the legislature. With regard to corrections and public safety, this was a top priority for MICA and for all counties. I know this legislative session as well has been for a number of years. Community corrections, probation services funding had fallen, instead of a sort of a 50-50 share with state government, we were down in the 20% range. At best. So a significant increase of $43 million Counties were asking for $56 million, particularly since as a piece of that, the legislation does include over the next 4 years what will be the phase out of probation services fees. So that will have an impact. So we can want to continue talking with the legislature about what full funding looks like. But still, we had been in the past getting, $2, $3, $4 million maybe at most every couple of years. So significant change. It also comes with a new formula. Now, all 87 counties, regardless of which of the three systems or approaches that are used locally for probation services or contracting with the county, everyone will get funding based through the same formula. Also, as part of that, there is a Community Supervision Advisory Committee that will does include heavy participation from experts within county government and within correctional systems, as well as the state agency around the tools and techniques and the assessment tools that probation service staff use across the state in order to help ensure that all the systems across the state have access to evidence-based, what works best in terms of assessing the risk of offenders when they are sentenced directly to probation or leave a correctional facility and are under supervision. So that's what that refers to.
So that's like a statewide
It's a statewide.
committee. That isn't like each committee's going to have a community supervision.
No, there is an expectation that with this new money, there will also be a more robust effort statewide to have all counties using best evidence-based practices in terms of probation services, and this is one standards and supervision committee that's going to help advise the Commissioner of Corrections on how that's done.
And Madam Chair, just one other question. I know we've gone long, just because this just reminded me, I had a constituent who owns a tavern, and he's concerned about the Paid Family and Medical Leave Act, and he wants to know if that's going to affect him. If you have a quick and dirty, if you don't, if you could get some information and I can respond back to him.
And let me just jump, Commissioners, because I know we have been at this a while. I'll just say that we also capture some parts of, there was $1 billion in one-time housing investments in addition to the local housing aid that's ongoing that I talked about.
Matt, can I back you up just a little bit on corrections yet? What are the strings that came with the Community Corrections Act funding this year?
Commissioners and Administrator Houle, not a lot of new strings other than the evidence-based practices protocols that will be set and delivered, but for the most part, the framework of counties who have opted for being a Community Corrections Act county, the general framework of that remains the same.
Okay, thank you.
Like I said, $1 billion in housing money, including for cities, counties, really across the housing spectrum, incentivizing home ownership, mobile homes, rental properties. Environment funding, we talked about SCORE funding, but there's also additional solid waste management money, PFAS cleanup and prevention support. There's money for soil health, there's EAB response, so that's all summarized as well, highlighted provisions related to counties in our summary. There were some general government provisions that I note there, and then yes, to Commissioner Coring's question, there were a number of other provisions that will impact county governments both as employers and as public agencies. One, the Paid Family Medical Leave Law will become effective, benefits beginning January 1, 2026. That's also when the assessment will begin. Right now, the assessment is set in law with the expectation that it will be 0.7% of salary that will be split between employers and employees that will pay in to support the cost of that fund. The enabling legislation does include a requirement that an actuarial study be done, and so the legislature will soon have additional information as to whether or not that 7/10 is expected to cover the benefit structure or whether that should be different. There are a lot of other parameters that I could talk about. In the end of the day, it is summarized in here. If you go to the general government section, there's a healthy section, Commissioner, on the paid family leave law.
Okay.
The Public Employee Labor Relations Act, there was a number of changes to law that will impact local governments in terms of how the PELRA laws are implemented. There was also a requirement for all employers, public and private, to provide minimum earned sick and safe time for employees. Most local government employees already receive earned sick and safe time at or above the levels required by the law. There was significant work that was done to reform, excuse me, the paraduty disability laws, both the benefit structure and the offsets for outside earnings for individuals who are on duty disability, as well as a duty disability mental health treatment benefit for individuals who present to their employer with having concerns about mental health, so that with the goal of restoring health, restoring physical and mental health, and helping individuals get back to work. And of course, we all know that about the legalization of adult use cannabis, and that local governments have an important role to play in impacts of that we are continuing to observe as to how all that plays out, and see where it makes the most sense to revisit with the legislature the authorities available to local governments in terms of responding to how that law is implemented. There was, in the end of the day, fortunately, included a number of provisions that did ultimately protect some amount of local control over between now and January 1, 2025, when we expect dispensaries in about that time frame to the structure to be in place for them to be licensed. There can be short-term moratoriums put in place until then, as well as regulations around preventing use in certain public areas and areas where minors will be, as well as some other restrictions that are available. And then there was some revenue sharing that came in at the end before the bill's final passage as well.
Matt, on the peace officer treatment program, I remember reading that the wages and benefits that we're paying during the treatment time period, we have to keep paying them when they're going to treatment for PTSD, that those may be reimbursed if the employer has implemented a mental health injury prevention measure, such as a peer support program. We do have a peer support program. How likely is it that we're going to get those costs reimbursed?
Mr. Chair, it's very likely you'll get the costs reimbursed, for certain on the front end. And I think that, the peer support program was an expectation that employee union and associations wanted to make sure happen. I think for most larger counties, that type of system is in place, as you say. The legislature funded this program. The estimated cost of the program at the time the bill passed was about $28 million a year. The legislature, as you know, had significantly more one-time money than it had ongoing money. They funded the program with a one-time $100 million appropriation. So the expectation is that it will cover at or about at least 4 years of costs. The way the bill is structured, those costs would fall back to local governments if the legislature didn't replace that one-time money at some point with an ongoing appropriation. So it's a concern. It's high on our radar screen. We're watching it. We were strongly supportive of the reforms themselves, and so we're in a good place, but it is something that we have to revisit in terms of the ongoing funding.
Better than it was.
Better than it was, yes, absolutely. Happy to answer any other questions. That's the end of our presentation. And again, thank you. We appreciate coming up here. We appreciate your membership and your input into our priority setting. And we are starting to look towards 2024.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you for all the
Thank
hard
you.
work. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.
Nancy, thanks for spending a week in our gorgeous county. We
Yeah, play
appreciate
golf,
it.
stay.
If you want to come for happy hour, it's about
Does that start at noon or what?
If it is, I better get going.
Can't start till 10 o'clock, John.
That's right, yeah. we got
Yeah,
it.
can't start at 8.
There was a day.
Thank
See you, Senator.
Chris is next.
Oh, Chris. Thank you.
You get a special binder.
Good morning.
Morning. Good morning.
We're here, this is, we have Bethany with Public Health, and we also have Stephanie Shook from the County Attorney's Office is on Teams. And what we want to do is just talk to you a little bit today about how things are going as far as some of the property cleanups that you've been seeing lately. And we really want to talk a little bit about what are some of the tools that we have currently available to us locally through ordinance. And then I think Bethany's going to talk a little bit about the public health nuisance statute and how that looks. And then talk a little bit about what might be some options going forward as far as, you know, what we think we could do that might help enhance that, and kind of want to get some feedback from you guys and see which direction that we think we should maybe start moving towards. So I'm just going to chat just a couple minutes about the two tools that are kind of in the toolbox that we have in land services. One is the land use ordinance. And what this really gets, as far as when we're talking about nuisance and junk, what this really regulates more are junk vehicles. And so we have an article in here that regulates junk salvage yards. And so it doesn't outright say how to deal with the vehicles, but what it does say is that any more than 2 unlicensed or unoperable vehicles on a property is then considered to be a junk salvage yard. And they have to go through a process to do that, and you have to be in the proper land use district to do that. And so in essence, what we're telling folks is that you can have up to 2 unlicensed vehicles or inoperable vehicles, you know, on your property. After that, then they have to either be licensed and operable or remove them from the property. So that's how we deal with junk vehicles. The other one I want to talk about, though, I think is a little more important, is our solid waste ordinance that we have in place. And this was adopted by the county board back in 1994. So it's definitely been around for a little while, but I just wanted to just touch on just a couple pieces of this that I think are important to what we're talking about today. And one was just the idea of what is the purpose of this ordinance. The purpose of this ordinance, the solid waste ordinance, is to protect natural resources, improve the environment, minimize surface and groundwater contamination, regulate the number, location, and operation of solid waste facilities, prevent public nuisances, establish a solid waste management service area, and create a system of service charges, and ensure that all persons are informed and responsible for their actions regarding solid waste management. So this is where we have the authorization to create the solid waste fee that we put on our taxes, but it also, for what we're really talking about today, is to prevent public nuisances. And we'll talk a little bit, I'll just give you a couple ideas as to what does the ordinance do and what does it allow as far as that. One thing, it's important to note that this ordinance does speak towards the Crow Wing County Solid Waste Department, which was then incorporated into the Land Services Department with our reorganization back in 2008. Let me just jump down to a couple of pages here. An interesting part of this ordinance is that the jurisdiction of this ordinance shall apply to all areas of Crow Wing County outside of the incorporated limits of municipalities and to all incorporated areas which either do not have a solid waste management ordinance provisions similar to this ordinance. So this can be something that prevails both in the unorganized part of the county and in the municipalities as well. This ordinance requires haulers, solid waste haulers, to be licensed. And then, but the part I think that's the most important piece and where we sometimes struggle is so when we're dealing with garbage and when we have garbage on the property, that's prohibited to be on there according to this ordinance is that if you're zoned agricultural, you are allowed to keep non-putrescible. So putrescible garbage is the things that rot and smell and give odor. That's your putrescible garbage. Non-putrescible is all those more inert, solid type things, and that would end up being things like, like refrigerators and couches and, those sorts of types of things. So you're allowed to actually consolidate items like that to an area not to exceed 1/2 acre or 5% of the parcel, whichever is less. And so you could, depending on how big of a lot you could have possibly up to 1/2 acre of just junk on your property, according, that's what's allowed by this ordinance. And then in all other districts, you're allowed to create up to 1% of that parcel could be covered by these non-putrescible items. And that's kind of where we get in a little bit of trouble when we're dealing with some of this nuisance stuff, because not everything that we see that comes to land services bleeds into the public health side of things, where they can assist with some of that. And some of it is just is a nuisance, but it doesn't get to the point of being a public health nuisance. And so take, for example, if you've got a 20,000 square foot lot in the lake, you could have 200 square feet of where you would be able to have accumulation of these types of items on your property. You have to consolidate it to a 1% of the parcel size. That can't exceed 1%. And so when we are working, we get complaints in about nuisances and junk and those sorts of things. And in essence, according to the ordinance we have now, we just ask them to, instead of having it strewn throughout the yard, they just have to consolidate it into one spot. It doesn't require there to be any specific location, or it doesn't require it to be, how far from, let's say, a property line, or from, to be screened or something along those lines. And so that's a little bit of what's problematic with the current ordinance, is just that provision in it. And so I just wanted you guys to be aware that it is a tool that we have, and it is helpful, so that it's not everywhere. It does have to be consolidated, but there's not and if it's not a public health nuisance, we don't really have a tool to require them to remove if they can meet that 1% standard. So,
Madam Chair, I guess, Chris, are you just, I'm just wondering, are you giving us information, or is there an ask?
well, I think what we want to do now is just more provide information, so that I think we want to make sure that we're all on the same page as understanding what we have at locally in our ordinances, and then what does statute provide, and then based on that information, we'll have discussion based on that, where do we want to go forward, as far as, do we want, we can do some more local ordinance adoptions, we can update the solid waste management ordinance to, maybe cover some of these nuisance type things a little more clearly. And so I think that's the direction, but we wanted to make sure that everybody understood, like when you see some of these public health nuisances come from Bethany and her team, why do these things happen the way they do? And she's be able to explain to you what is in statute and how those play out. So that way, at least, I think we're all on the same page as to what tools we have, and then we can decide at that point if we think we need to get more tools, or maybe, enhance some of the tools we currently have, or that. So unless there's any more questions about the solid waste part or the land use part, I think I'll pass over to Bethany at this point.
Just a comment. I just know that people that live in town live under a different set of rules than the people out in the country. And I think a lot of people choose to live out in the country because in the city, there's people that'll drive around and make sure you're cutting your lawn and junk isn't accumulating. But I will say that the board has been extremely aggressive on cleaning up these nuisances. And I have heard from my constituents, and I know that I'm in favor of making sure we have the tools to clean these up, whether it's somebody starting a junkyard of refrigerators or cars, or when it's, having enough, it's just, I just don't think we can't let that get out of control, because I think it's just going to affect the environment. We saw the case of the 200 rats, and when you start accumulating this stuff, it breeds rats, mosquitoes, tires breed mosquitoes, and pretty soon you got COVID-82, or the new COVID-82, or whatever it is. And but I just want you to know that I'm supportive of us making sure we have the tools when somebody calls and says, wow, this person's getting out of control. I know, and I know I've always holler that I'm for property rights. I am for property rights, but I tell people that, you know what? you're not gonna own that property forever because you're gonna die. Yeah, you might leave it to your family, but you make a mess there, you dump oil or whatever you're doing on that property, it's gonna have an effect 50 years down the road of the people that are left, you know, somebody, so I just think that there's just gotta be some rules to make sure that something egregious doesn't happen. So anyway, that's my
Madam
speech.
Chair and Commissioner Coring, I appreciate that comment, because what we find is that everybody wants to get their neighbor cleaned up.
Yes.
But don't come talk to them about the junk on their property. So that's, right, that's the interesting part that we get to deal with this. So
Yeah.
what we want to be is just consistent. We want to make sure that we have a set of rules that are consistent, we treat everybody the same, nobody gets, any different treatment for whatever reasons might be. And so, I think at this point, Bethany, if you want to take over and explain some of
Madam
that,
Chair,
that'd be
if I
great.
might, before we move on. Chris, what I didn't hear you say was you mentioned the 1% and the 5%.
Right.
You didn't talk about the height. So I can stay within your parameters, but I can go as high as I want.
No restriction.
So something to consider when
Yeah.
we're looking at this ordinance.
And I think when we come back and circle back after we have this conversation with Bethany, I think I have some ideas and recommendations I think that we should think about.
Okay, thank you.
So I wanted to discuss a little bit about my processes, procedures, maybe give a brief synopsis of how a public health nuisance is received, and then the process that ensues after that. We receive complaints through multiple avenues, land services. We also receive direct complaints through the public. Social workers and sheriff's office, and when they're out in the public or working with clients, sometimes encounter a potential public health nuisance concern and will report those to me, as well as townships that maybe have been struggling with a property that they have attempted to have cleaned up and been unable to be successful with. So those are just some of the ways in which I'm getting some information about, where these public health nuisances exist and who is concerned with them. Examples of public health nuisances do include improperly stored solid waste, used appliances, accumulation of filth, improperly maintained animal pens, deceased animals, any potential mosquito or insect vector or rodent harborage, any accumulation of filth, or occasionally even interior of homes when any of the previous mentioned nuisances are present that also involve vulnerable adults or children. As well as homes that may have evidence of a clandestine drug lab. When public health receives a report of potential public health nuisances, I will complete a site visit, and then I do photo document any evidence that I find. To determine if a public health nuisance exists, we kind of have to ask two questions. One is, how does this condition affect the public? Does it affect the public? And then, does it affect the health? And if the answer to both of those is yes, then it is a public health nuisance. If the answer to those questions, either one, is no or both is no, then it is screened out as not being a public health nuisance, but we're still offering resources, education material, and even guidance at times just to help improve whatever concerns there might be. At the site visit, sometimes the property concerns are minimal, and providing education or materials or resources is sufficient to remedy the concern. Other times the concerns are a little bit more serious, and/or I'm unable to make contact with the property owner in which I could communicate, what we need to have done. So in those cases, you're getting an abatement notice sent directly to the property owners, and many times this is their first receipt of the report of the nuisance. So if I haven't been able to make contact with them on the property, they're receiving a public health nuisance abatement notice in the mail. And sometimes if they're very proactive, they'll go to their commissioner or member of the public prior to even speaking to me about the letter. So we've seen that happen previously too, where they'll come directly to you first and then to me. And I just wanted to explain that when I do touch base with the property owners, I'm using discretion. My discretionary approach provides for reasonable leniency when at the request of the property owner an extension of the timeline is requested. If there's sufficient improved progress or timeline of plans to address the concern, which are reasonable, I will work with the property owner to ensure timelines and status checks are done, and then answer any questions and assisting with resources along the way so that they can improve the conditions. So properties that end up being presented at board are the properties in which the owners cannot or will not abate the nuisance on their own or in a sufficient timeline.
Can you just explain the time frame statutorily, how quick it can go? I think we should probably cover that.
Yeah, so the statutory timelines provide that we complete a site visit within 10 days of receiving the reports. Once that site visit is completed, we have 10 days to issue an abatement notice, and then the property owner has 10 days to abate the nuisance. And that's what the statute says.
So that allows us to do that. It doesn't mean that we're mandatorily have to follow that.
Correct.
But that is the authority given to us. So I mean, it can be in 20 days. That's the timeframe. We can be, in front of you in 20 days to request an abatement to clean up a property.
And Madam Chair and Chris, I'm hopeful that every one of these, because these are always kind of sensitive deals. I'm hoping they come before the governing body of the county board, so that we can determine, just like the Coles junkyard, when they got the letter and said, you got 10 days to clean things, that isn't realistic. We got to be realistic, and so I think everyone is a case-by-case basis.
Oh, go ahead, Stephanie, I'm sorry.
Sorry. I think what's important, commissioners, is that the statute says specifically that notice, it's no longer than 10 days for them to fix it. And so the statute requires us to put the 10-day notice in there. That is only when we haven't had that contact. Bethany tries really hard. The other thing is with the Coles example that Commissioner Coring talked about, although the junkyard part of that couldn't be done in 10 days, because of the septic system that was sitting wide open had to be done, that was another reason why the letter went immediately, because it was twofold. So Coles never actually got to you technically, because we had communication with him, or Bethany did, and we sat down and had a meeting. So you guys didn't see an abatement about that property, because we are working with him. I just want to make sure you guys understand that the statute requires the 10 days. It's not that we don't want to give them the ability to do it themselves.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Cole came to me, and I instructed him to come to open forum, and I said, then we'll have a conversation about it. That's how that happened.
Well, and Madam Chair and Commissioner, I think one part about this that makes it challenging is that when we notify or send letters out to people to say, hey, you've got to clean up or do things, they're not really excited about doing that. And so sometimes they'd like to just ignore it and not pay much attention to it. But when we send a letter that says you need to do this in 10 days, it does catch their attention, and it lets them know that they do need to reach out to us. And that's that's the benefit to that, I think, is that it does, they do, because if after 10 days, we could be up here talking to you guys and talking about an abatement. So I think people understand that, and it does allow them to come in so we can have the conversation like we did with Kelly on his property over there too, to come up with a reasonable time frame to, to be able to get things cleaned up, so.
Mm-hmm.
So any questions about the process?
And then one other thing, it's just kind of, the other guy that was my constituent, I don't know how many containers we took out of there, 40 containers or something like that.
36 and a half semi-loads.
You get a situation like that, and you're kind of looking, going, oh my God, we're almost to 10 days. What if it takes 11 days? What's the state going to do? Come on, really?
Right, well, and it's...
There's all these legislators, all they want to do when they get there is pass more laws so they can, well, I passed a law, big deal. That's why we got too damn many laws in a way, but.
And the 10-day piece there is really enforced by the county attorney's office, so it's not like it's on a state-driven, it's a locally driven process.
What I would suggest is you should read that statute as that the county is obligated to do things within certain time frames, because we're the ones who get sued, and if we don't do what we're supposed to do, that can be a defect in the process that the court will overturn an outcome. Think of it as an obligation on us. As soon as we're working with the landowner, then I understand the statute says 10 days, but the reality is if it doesn't happen in 10 days, we can't get it in court in 10 days. We work with people and we try to be reasonable.
Absolutely.
So think of it that way.
Exactly.
It's more of a restriction on us than it is on them.
Right.
And that's correct. I mean, the statute specifically says, and it's Minnesota Statute 145A.04, it says that the city community health board, its agent, shall order the owner or occupant of the property to remove or abate the threat within a time specified in the notice, but no longer than 10 days. And so it's really on us, but I think we have worked with all the property owners that wanted to do and wanted to do cleanups. So Tim is correct that it's an onerous that we put on ourselves or that the statute puts on us.
Right.
And that's why those letters can sometimes feel like they're under the gun. But for example, Commissioner Coyne, the one that you're talking about that we took 40 loads out of, had we worked with him or had he wanted to work with us, there would have been a process. But as we knew that property had continued to be an issue that had been growing for years.
Right. Right.
Okay, so.
But I guess I'm now kind of lost on what we're talking about. I don't see anything wrong with sending out a letter and saying that you got 10 days to clean it up, but then when they come to us, I think we got to look at the situation. I know the county attorney's office has a tremendous amount of discretion. Don can, or Stephanie, you guys can choose to charge somebody or not charge somebody. It's all up to you. You have a tremendous amount of discretion. Really. So.
And that's just it, is that Bethany has discretion with respect to the public health nuisances. If it's a situation where there is public health involved, that's why there's such a quick timeline. But if we look at it, and Bethany and I will talk collectively and look at different resources and what does the property owner want to do, or are they willing to do? And we work together with them. Bethany tries very hard to get in touch with the owners prior to any letter being sent out. And as we indicated, there is discretion. It's just, we have to start the process as it states, and then from there, we work with the property owner as much as possible and as much as we can. And there's so many that we have that you guys never see because of that discretion. I think we just wanted to make sure that everyone understood this is kind of what the statute requires of us and what the statute enables us to do, and how can we expand that or even look at it more closely. Because as Commissioner Coyne talked about, he wants to make sure that we clean up these properties and that we do the best job that we can, working with the property owners. And if they don't want to, how do we do that? And so Chris can talk more about this, but there's actually, right now, we only have the statute to allow us for the community or the public health nuisances. We actually have the ability as a county to enact a public health nuisance ordinance, which could assist us and give us more tools for the property cleanups.
I think that's the question today. You've given us a really good overview of the processes that you use. As the practice leaders in this area, what changes should we be making that you would recommend to our regulatory scheme?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I think the big thing I think we need to figure out is, do we like this percent coverage on the lot that allows, junk and refuse to be on that 1%, 5%? So when I look at that, I think about things like refrigerators and couches and those sorts of items. And right now, if it's not a public health nuisance, they'd be allowed to, on a half-acre lot on the lake, they'd be able to have 200 square feet of that. And as long as it was in this boundary, they could be able to do that. I really can't think of a reason why we'd really want somebody to ever have a refrigerator outside in their yard. And for one thing, it's a safety hazard because, if it's not bolted or, locked shut, that's the easy way for a little kid to sneak in and have a door shut. And, there's tragedies happen because of that. So that's a big issue, is just those white goods like that. I would like to see us update the solid waste ordinance. And, I think it probably needs an overhaul. It's served its purpose. But I think we need to add some parts into that would just define what clearly defines more of a nuisance. And I think we could have some of that discussion about a public health nuisance at the same time, and there could be some more opportunities for collaboration on trying to, distinguish what these are, and we could have a better definition of what we would want to see as a public health nuisance. That's the direction I think we should go, because I can't think of any reason why we would ever think it's a good idea for somebody to have a couch in their front yard. Now, you see them around the fire ring sometimes, people like to do that, but a few rains, a dry summer, it probably works fine, but a few summers, with the rain like we have usually, that's not going to be a good type thing out there with rain and getting wet and causing even larger public health problems at that point. So I think that's the direction I'd like to see us go.
Madam Chair,
Hi.
if I might, have you ever been to West Virginia? Because they have non-operating refrigerators on all their stoops out there, so.
Yeah, I believe it.
And the more they have, the richer they are.
I believe it.
Madam Chair, so one thing that jumped out when Stephanie was talking, that some that you're working on that we don't even hear about, I hope that's not the case. I want to know of anything that's happening in my district as far as if there's going to be a public health nuisance. I think you're informing me. Because what happens is the first person that they reach out to a lot of times is their county commissioner. At least that's what happens to me. And I don't want to be caught flat-footed and not know what's going on. So I hope you're informing us of everything.
Madam Chair, Commissioner,
And
I don't believe that,
I think-
that was exactly maybe worded the correct way. You are receiving any abatement notices that we
Okay.
send your constituents. I think what she's referring to is there's a lot of times I do these site visits, or I will address a potential public health nuisance that maybe just doesn't rise to the
Sure.
level of needing to be notified.
Okay.
Yeah, our goal is voluntary compliance. We want folks to be able to,
Yeah.
to get things taken care of on their own, and you won't hear about those typically because we'll just get them resolved, and, we have enforcement cases in our department, and that we work through, and I mean, because for us to update you on every single one, you'd have to come in for office hours, because we have a few of them that we would, to
No, but
do
it
that.
gets
but
pretty
we-
serious when somebody gets a letter that says, you got 10 days, buddy, and clean this up.
But I do think just having worked with
And
Beth. Yeah, go ahead, Steph, I'm sorry.
I misspoke. I want to say, when I said it doesn't come to the county board, I meant the collective county board to present and to request an order for abatement. I know that Bethany copies the commissioner and the district anytime a notice is sent. And as I think all of you have received copies of those letters, you don't see them on the agenda at the next hearing because they've done voluntary compliance. So I did misspeak about that. I didn't mean individually, I meant collectively presenting to the board.
The commissioner of the district is informed immediately.
Yeah,
The other commissioners are informed at least once a week.
yeah.
And I would say too, that I think, working with Bethany and with Stephanie, I think we have a little bit of a spidey sense that tingles. And so if we think something is you guys know, I call you, we talk just to say, you might just want to know that you might get a
Yeah.
phone call about this situation or that. So
Thank
we
you for
do, I like to give you a heads up because, I definitely don't want you ever to be, flat-footed and you don't have the right information. So, and feel free if you hear something in the community, feel free to give us a call too. And, point out stuff to us and that we might need to know about, because it's, we know what we know, and we don't always know what we don't know, so.
Madam Chair, if I might, just for the record, I want it noted that District 3 doesn't have any of these issues.
I was aware of that.
We're all aware of that.
Oh, yes, thank you.
We're all aware of that.
We're all going to move to your district.
Madam Chair, based on what Chris has told us and Stephanie and Bethany, I think it would make sense for them to form a small work group of people that are closely working in this area and bring back a draft of changes that they would, from a practice perspective, suggest that you consider. Those will be suggestions. And it at least will give you the basis for a discussion to say, I like this or I don't like this. And then we can move that process forward. I don't see particular urgency in August, and so my goal would be that we equip you for the next spring.
Well, I think right now we are working with Paul Reavers and Jason Kabuchek on some updates to the land use ordinance itself. I think we would tie this in as part of that. I think as we do that process, I think they would just come together at the same time, if that works for you guys.
Good.
Perfect.
Let's make it so.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. One man's junk is another man's treasure.
I know.
Yeah, don't even go there with me. Paul, you haven't been to my place.
I have not been to your place, Commissioner.
We're gonna make a trip up there. We'll go out on the big whitefish.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
You guys can
Some
come
of
and
you
sit
like to
down.
Yeah, come on up here if you
Table?
want.
We haven't bitten anybody all day.
Nod a little bit, but bark once in a while.
The hot seat. We call it the
Hot seats, yep. Oh, boy.
Morning, guys.
Good morning.
How's that road project coming?
Good morning, Madam
How's
Chair
that-
and
How's
Commissioners.
the road project coming?
Huh?
How's the road
115.
project coming?
We love the road.
We dance every day.
It's beautiful, but there is one of these sort of junk houses along the road.
You could work
Can't go
on that
anywhere.
house, that would be greatly appreciated.
They're gonna visit afterwards. The Lees live on County Road 115.
I know that.
I knew once that road was done, well, once it's done, I'm thinking everybody's gonna go, wow. Or before, everybody was like fighting it, I don't know.
So, just an aside, we heard all kinds of things, and you heard all kinds of things about the road for years.
Yeah.
Since the road has been worked on this summer, I have not heard one negative thing from any of the homeowners, including the ones that were the most vocal before.
Yeah.
So now that they're seeing it, they're really happy with it. The only complaint, if you hear anything, is, boy, people drive pretty fast on it, which
Oh,
we
yeah.
all knew.
That's always the issue.
Yeah, that'd be.
That is an issue.
Yeah, we're gonna have to park
But at
some,
least now we have lanes that we can dive.
we're gonna have to probably, get some law enforcement out there afterwards and do some speed zones.
Speed
The
zones.
hard part about those speed zones is 80% of the people who get the ticket live on the road.
Get a lot of big trucks cutting across to
Yep,
127. That's where we see the speed, is the big trucks going through.
Yeah. Thanks for the
Anyway,
update.
thank you.
Thank you.
But before we jump into the presentation today, I just wanted to take an opportunity to introduce myself to the board. My name is Tony Hansen. I'm a new regional director with Extension. I started with Extension in May, and I'm working with 8 different counties in the region, inclusive of Crow Wing County. And I've been working with Commissioners Barrows and Lubke on the Extension Committee, and it's been a great summer. I just wanted to thank you all for your continued support of Extension. Extension's very busy across the entire state, all 87 counties producing programming at a statewide and regional level, but it's the partnership with you all that allows Extension to provide programming on a local level. And so I thank you very much for that. And then I'll step aside. Brittany, if you want to join us up here, and I'll.
So between Brittany, who I think you all know is our coordinator, Jennifer, who is the president of the Crow Wing County Master Gardeners, and myself, we're going to tag team a little bit here. This is going to be a much more uplifting presentation than the last one.
What in
What are you
the
doing on
world?
that?
I don't even know what in the,
damage and the death count.
Here, put it on the ground. I'll take care of it for
I
you.
can't get this to shut off. Sorry, I did that during the other one too. But I tried
I'll
to.
just put mine in my pocket so it doesn't do anything bad.
Here he comes again, without me even touching it.
Turn it off.
I'm gonna have to
haunted.
turn
Turn
the
it
whole
off.
phone
It's
off.
a haunted phone.
So,
Something
Madam
about
Chair,
Maui.
Commissioners, Administrator Hool, we want to accomplish a few things here today. The first is to say thank you. I don't think you guys hear enough how much we appreciate the support that we get from the county for the programs that we're running. Second, to give you a little more uplifting beat to your day with some of the stories that we're going to tell you with what we're doing. And third, give you a little bit of a feel for all the projects that we're doing across the entire county of Crow Wing. So Over the last few years, I have had the privilege of running a project or being the chair of a project called the Community Giving Project. This project is unique to Crow Wing County. In fact, it's one where other counties that have Master Gardener programs are jealous of, and I get phone calls about it almost on a monthly basis saying, how are you doing this? What is the magic associated with the Community Giving Project that means you're getting more Master Gardeners as well as serving the community? And the simple answer is it's the dedicated people in the Master Gardener program. It's the fact that we have the Northland Arboretum, where we have as a home base here, and the fact that we're doing something for the community that the community wants, and that's with the support that you're giving us. This project started in 2019 as just a giving garden project, where after the pandemic hit, we didn't know what we could do. We were told by the University of Minnesota, which were a part of the extension, that we couldn't do anything in the gardens at first. I wrote a exemption request to the university, got an exemption where we could actually be outside and garden for the summer and grow produce for the local food shelves here. First year we did several hundred pounds of food. We were quite proud of it, but we thought we can do better. And so since then, we keep adding projects to the Community Giving Project. At this point, we have a team of people who start bedding plants that are then distributed to other projects in the county. One of those is a patio garden project, which Jennifer is going to talk about in a minute. Another is we have a youth gardening program. We have an adult gardening program as well. And then we have the Giving Garden that we're currently operating. The youth program serves children between 8 and 15 years old. And this program starts people down this path of being self-sufficient. It teaches them how to fish at a very young age. And it's fun for our instructors to go out to the Northland Arboretum and see these young people embracing the natural world and learning how to be a little self-sufficient. Learning that groceries don't come from a grocery store necessarily. They can also come from a garden. And to make this point in particular, on the right side of the screen, you'll see My First Garden. This is a 8-year-old who was in the gardening program this year, and he did a county fair project. He got a ribbon for it, and his project was about his first garden in this gardening class. So did we have an impact on that young man? Absolutely. Are we having an impact on the rest of the gardeners? Absolutely. And it's a program we're quite proud of. Next slide. The next slide talks about our adult gardening program. We call it Gardening 101. This year we have 21 participants in this program. That's a 20% increase from last year. In fact, we had to turn people away this year because we didn't have enough space for them in the gardens, because we're doing a giving garden, we're doing youth gardening, we're doing adult gardening. We're running out of space because it's so demanded by people in the community.
Well, thank God you're at the Arboretum.
Exactly.
There probably is a little more space out there, but.
Except that we have to have the money to build
put
more
it in.
gardens and fences and water.
You
and-
guys garden a lot better than I do.
So this year, we actually have 5 students from last year who decided that they saw what we were doing, they enjoyed what we were doing, and they wanted to become master gardeners. It is the single biggest leader for new interns for the Master Gardener program that we have in Crow Wing County. And this year we expect to have a very similar result with a lot of the people who are in our adult class who will join the Master Gardening program. Interesting thing about that is we probably have more nurses than anything else in our Master Gardening class. And why is that? Nurses are service-oriented. They serve the public. They want to do good. And that's what they see with the Master Gardening projects that we're doing, where we're educating people on horticultural skills, where we're serving the people of the county. And so they want to be involved in that as they go on. And these are nurses that are still working or teaching, as well as retired nurses. So it's interesting for us to see that our average age for new master gardeners is actually dropping, including a lot of interns that are still working, which then causes us to have other issues like having the programs where they can come out and do things after hours to get their required master gardener hours. So the next slide. And then last thing I'm going to talk about is the giving gardens that we started in result of the pandemic. It's grown every single year. Last year we expanded into having a second giving garden location up in Ideal Corners. This year we have giving gardens not only at the Northland Arboretum and Ideal Corners. We've got a small plot at CLC, which we're hoping to grow into something bigger. If you haven't looked at it, the school system or the community college system has one of the highest food insecurity rates of any class of people in the state. And so their food shelf gets really heavily used. Having a little giving garden out there that can actually serve the students of the CLC is something that we think we can help with, and we're starting that this year. We've got Timberwood Church, and then we've got 4 individual gardeners that are also providing food from their own giving gardens. At one point in our discussion with you, you pointed out that it would be nice if we could serve all of Crow Wing County. And we have worked hard over the last few years to make sure that we are doing that. So, for example, yesterday we donated over 200 pounds of food to the Emily Food Shelf. We donate to Pequot Lakes, to Salvation Army. The Garrison Food Shelf loves us because Garrison's in Crow Wing County, but everybody forgets that. And they love the fact that we go down there 2 or 3 times a summer and provide hundreds of pounds of fresh produce for their food shelf. Cross Lake is another food shelf we support. But the interesting thing about Cross Lake is we have a gardener who goes to their community gardens every single week and has an arrangement with the people who are gardening there to harvest their community garden spaces if they're not using the produce, so that the produce does not go to waste. She's already harvested a couple hundred pounds of food that would have otherwise spoiled and gone to waste that's now into the food shelf system. I mentioned the Emily Food Shelf, and then we also support CWC WIC with food. Last year we did 2,436 pounds. This year we're already, as of today, 935. The slide is a little outdated because every week, every few days, that number is going up. Our goal just at the Northland Arboretum alone is a couple thousand pounds of food. And since 2020, when we really got this started, we've done 7,345 pounds of food that we've donated. Jennifer?
Next slide.
Oh, and then next slide is a small picture of some of the giving gardens, where they're located, and people working them.
So as Dan alluded to, we also start from the bedding plant project, we go into the patio garden, which has been just a joy to work with. This year we donated 168 patio gardens, whether they were tomato, pepper, eggplant, or lettuce bowls. And the lettuce bowls also got little bags with green bean seeds, which, you know, we're just crop succession here. We're helping them keep on going for the winter or for the fall. And the value of those, we did a little survey of some of our local nurseries, and the value ranged from basically $15 for a lettuce bowl to up to $40 for a tomato plant in a container. So the average was roughly $18.51. So over $3,000 were donated in a variety of fresh produce to local organizations. And this year we added, last year we had 8 recipients, the top 8, and this year we added Habitat for Humanity for the new homeowners within Crow Wing County, and also Cross Lake Food Shelf. So they were all very excited, and on the next slide, we received you have to point over there, I think. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
There you are.
We got some patio feedback, but one that's not on there was an email that I received. The one on the left is from a Cuyuna Regional Medical Center from the senior living, and the other is from Lakes area, the food shelf. But the one that I received in an email was from Homestead, and you don't have that in your packet. I had to respond to the person saying, you could have told me to have a Kleenex ready. The caregiver of one of our recipients last year has been going out to visit her patient. And every day that she goes in there, they visit his green pepper plant. Now, mind you, this fellow has kept his green pepper plant going all winter long. They harvested peppers. Think about that. They harvested peppers and did stuffed peppers and goulash through the winter. She said every day he swears it grows, and they go over and they visit it. He mentions that, they have to measure, and he talks to it. The plant is now a bush. In his house, it's okay. It's 4 feet tall and 2 feet wide. So this spring, the care provider went and said, we need to be putting it outside. And he was quite upset. He said, why? It doesn't have to go outside. I talk to it every day. It can't go outside. So this is how attached this program has become to some of these recipients. And we're kind of anxious to hear what plant he gets this year, or got this year, and how the reaction. He might have a regular garden going in his house if he gets some tomatoes, but we're very excited about sharing that program or that response with you.
When I hear a story like that, I think to myself, I wonder if that's an old farmer.
Well, you know what I thought of when...
In the dirt, hands in the dirt.
You know what I thought about I thought, you know what? This guy right here talks to his old truck. And when he was on his way to Emily and when it blew a belt, he was really talking to it.
Yeah. But
How'd you like that one?
That's a good one. I think about that old farmer, and they go, I've seen that at nursing homes before, where the old farmer in the wheelchair, and he's just got to put his hands in the dirt, and they're growing flowers or something. And I think to myself, for that guy, it's probably a pretty important thing. Doesn't seem important to me,
but it
is for him.
Join one of our programs, we can make it important for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can get you into the class.
I got a couple of plants in my office that could use some help.
We consult.
As you can see too, there were, the Cuyuna Regional Medical Center did a Facebook post, and also Homestead. And we love when they post these things because it helps us get our name out, and also the Arboretum. In addition to the bedding, or to the patio gardens, we distributed bedding plants, and there were 25 of them that were unpotted that we were able to provide to Northern Pines, our place, the Emily Food Shelf, who has some little gardens in their own food shelf area, and also Port Homes. And so it's another way for us to help get some of these locations some plants to start growing, whether it's for one person or it's a group. Okay, and then over to Brittany.
All right, so thank you, Dan and Jennifer, for your leadership. Like they said, a lot of our Master Gardener volunteers are involved in the Community Giving Project. I'm here today to just briefly talk about some of our other projects and our impact as a whole in the county. So as you can see, we shared a similar slide last year. Right now we have very close to 70 Master Gardener volunteers. 9 of those are retired, so they're part of the program, but they're not volunteering. So 60 active Master Gardener volunteers, and we have 24 partner project locations. And like Dan and Jennifer mentioned, we really work hard to reach all areas of the county and all districts in the county because they all can be impacted by the Master Gardener Volunteer Program. So we're proud to keep both our number of volunteers and our number of projects growing. Next slide. I kind of realized that this is perhaps backwards in time, but as you can see from 2020, we had 38 volunteers report hours. The University of Minnesota Extension expects active Master Gardener volunteers to report a minimum of 25 hours of volunteer service. Interns report 50 hours, and that is, many of our volunteers report many, many more hours than that. And then in 2021, we continue to increase both our numbers of volunteers and our hours reported. And then in 2022, we're increasing further. And what I'm proud to see that the contacts that we have are also increasing even greater. And all of these numbers, so the volunteers report their time in a database, and they also report the contacts that they have. And I would say that on average, our volunteers underreport the time and contacts that they have. So I'm proud to see those numbers grow. And I peeked this morning, and volunteers have until the end of the year to report their time, but we're already at 40 hours short of 2,000 hours. So I'm thinking that 2023 will be another great year for the program in terms of hours. So next slide. We are continuing to expand our presence in the community. We were at the fair again this year and had conversations with a minimum of 558 people. I know that you guys are all I talked to Commissioner Lubke at the fair, and I know that you guys have all put in your time at the fair, and it's fun to see the public, and we're kind of a standing item in the horticulture building, and we have a lot of people that like to come and try to stump us with their gardening questions. But it's an easy conversation opener to just say, like, hey, are you growing anything? Like, how's your garden doing? And hear how the conversation evolves. And as part of the University of Minnesota Extension, we always try to give science-based research, answers to people's questions, and point them in the right direction. Some of our other expanding impacts include the helpline. We're always available to answer the public's questions. That was actually, our helpline number was included in the property tax information this year, which was good for the public's awareness, and we've definitely seen an increase in calls from that. So thank you guys for including our info. I think that we provide a valuable service to the community in that way. We continue with our monthly presentations at the library, and we are now hybrid, so people can join us online or in person at the library. So I'm proud that we were able to figure out the technology behind that transition and be as accessible as we can to people of all sorts. So next slide. Some of the new partner connections that we've made this year include Eagle View Elementary. We're consulting with them to put in some new educational gardens. We're also consulting with the Pequot Library. They acquired a new lot, and they're trying to envision what they can do for the community with that space and how they can educate their citizens. The Emily Food Shelf, as Dan and Jennifer mentioned, we did a site visit with them in the spring, and they are really serving a community in need. So it was eye-opening for us to go up there and to really talk with them and see what we can do to help them. And we're hoping to expand to directing them to grow some gardens themselves up there next year. The city of Cross Lake, we're talking with them. We're, as Dan mentioned, harvesting food from their gardens and bringing them to the food shelf, excess food, preventing it going to waste. We're looking at getting into the Cross Lake schools this coming year. We had a couple Master Gardener volunteers that directed Harrison Elementary and with their hydroponic system, which is pictured there. We've been in talks with the Food Shelf Coalition, and a new project that we're consulting with is the My Neighbor to Love, which is the homeless facility in Creekside Community in Brainerd. They have a really ambitious vision of having a community food forest there for their residents, and so we're helping them develop what that would look like, which is exciting. Next slide. So I think you've all received this, but I'm in front of your face now, so we hope that you could come out to the Northland Arboretum tomorrow anytime between 11 and 1. The gardens are flourishing, the youth will just be wrapping up, and some of the adult students might be swinging out there. We've invited all of our stakeholders and partners out to come visit just that one area that we're involved in, but it's a great example of the impact that volunteers can have. So in conclusion, I know we're kind of small fry and what's on all your guys' mind, but I'm happy to be here today and sharing some of what we do. So any questions?
Madam Chair, if I might, I would just like to say that, first of all, I want to compliment you on going countywide, because I know that was a big discussion when I first came on as a commissioner. You guys have certainly achieved that. You've looked at all four corners, I believe, of the county, and you're expanding. Some of it's a little slower than others, but the efforts are there, and we're seeing the results of that. The other thing I would say to my fellow commissioners, and Commissioner Franzine's been out there at the invite of you folks each summer, so I appreciate that. But to see the faces on these young kids who are raising something that's theirs, and they're so proud of that. Administrator Hool's been there. It's just exciting to see their faces. The adults too, but it's just a little more engaging with those young kids who never thought about raising something themselves, and what you folks bring, the opportunity you bring to them to enjoy the fruits of their efforts. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will not be able to make it this year. I got schedule conflicts, otherwise I would be there.
We do allow private tours.
That sounds like a good thing to do.
I mean, and if you wanted to, and I will extend this without having talked with my partners here, if you're interested, and if Wednesday night between 5:30 and 6:30 works out, you can certainly come to the ARB and see the adults. We do a half hour in the morning, or half hour meeting first, and then we go into the gardens. Again, it's really, it's insightful, because they too, while they're a little bit harder to get excited, when they start pulling their produce and start seeing it, it is like a wonderland. So I encourage you, if you have that time, we'll take you then too.
Miracle. Seed, producing food.
It really Again, is. Thank you all very much for the support.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yep.
Dan, he can't grow a weed in his yard, so is there some help available for him?
Vegetables.
Might be.
Thank
There you go. Thanks, Dan.
Okay, land donation.
Hey, good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Real quick, if you wanted, I had just a little bit, there was a quick question about PILT in our county, and I just thought maybe if I could just add just a 2-minute clarification on some of that. You know, we have about 130,000 acres of public land, whether it's tax forfeited, county-owned, DNR, whether it's a wildlife refuge or that kind of stuff. And the main formula is $3 per acre, but there's another formula, depending on how we've acquired the land or somebody, they'll pay a percentage of the sale price. So that's why the math is a little bit off. But last year, we got $610,000 in PILT. This year for '23, we got $750,000. Out of the $750,000, the general fund gets $680,000 of that.
That's general, okay.
That's general fund, and then the Resource Development Fund gets $64,000.
Resource Development Fund.
Yeah, so that's a fund that Land Services has that will go for either land acquisitions, county forest road maintenance, those types of activities to keep that program going from a public land management kind of thing.
One that we got special legislation for, isn't it?
Yeah, we were able to put, that is.
I heard a yes and a no.
Well,
Yeah, guess what? I'm listening to her.
well, we got special legislation for the apportionment of the land sale and timber sale divvying up of the money. So we have had,
So PILT is still just following statute?
Correct. Okay. Yeah. So I just thought I would run that by you. Any questions on that? But
But do you know how much of an increase we're going to see?
well, last year we got 610,000 total. This year we got 750,000 total.
Oh, we're going to get next year?
I do not know.
Okay.
Okay, Madam Chair, Commissioners, the first thing we had for you was a discussion. We were approached by the state of Minnesota to potentially entertain a land donation to the Cuyuna State Rec Area. This is just over 4 acres in size. This forfeited originally this used to be part of a 40. It forfeited back in 1976. In 2012, we split the property and did a land exchange with Richard Harrison. And prior to this 4 acres has had some undivided interest. So just like as an example, in 2012, or in 95, there was only 9 30-seconds that went tax forfeited. Then another year, 14 30-seconds, and then 13 64s. It can get split if somebody dies and they will their ownership to their family and whatnot. Anyways, the big ask, not so much an ask, but seeing where the board was at with potential donation to the rec area on this little sliver there in blue you see on the map. If you're not familiar with the Sagamore, they call this the Sagamore unit. Right here is a road that goes into their public access on the lake. And they just, this is their newest expansion, I believe, in the rec area. These are wider trails all over in here for if you have a disability, and they're the wide, I think there's 3 or 4 wheel bikes that can go down these tracks. I believe Doug has sat in on a couple of those presentations and stuff.
Madam Chair. So, if we do donate this, are we going to have any strings attached to it? Can we put any strings attached to it? Or?
Well, sure, they can say no. I think what they're looking for is an out-and-out land donation, right? Like sell for $1, or are they looking to sell it at fair market value?
It is for $1.
And do we use it for forestry purposes?
No.
Does it have any value for residential development?
Potential, the 4 acres, I estimate about 1.5 acres. There's a creek that runs right through here. All of this right here, you can almost say is pretty much unusable. That's about 1.5 acres, and you got a little bit of road right away here with Sagamore Road going in here. So that still might leave maybe around 3 acres. I'm not familiar with the topography. We looked at it. For 2024 assessment, we'll have about $25,000 on the parcel as a total for estimated market value.
Has it been offered for sale before?
It has not.
Okay.
Has anybody, what brought this, what sparked this?
Sure. This was about 1.5 years ago. There was a new region director, and I wish I would have brought his name. And he says, this is on a list of things that was handed to me when I took this new job. And we would like to acquire this piece because it fits well with what we've developed over here in the Sagamore unit. There's a bike trail that comes real close somewhere. There's a bridge somewhere in here, and it comes really close to the property line. They would like to just keep it natural and that,
Yeah.
in the woods kind of feel.
Doug, Madam Chair, Doug, what do you think? I guess this is your district, so I guess I'm gonna kind of defer to you, huh?
I thought at one time we had an agreement that any tax forfeit property would be handed off to the rec area, but this is outside of the rec area currently.
Currently, yeah.
What would it,
At least my understanding is, unless I'm wrong with that.
that's different than, I guess, as far as what I thought we did practice in the past, but what would the value of this, if we were to put it on a land auction, any idea what it could?
I think it's probably gonna be anywhere from 22 to 28,000 is what we would offer it for sale.
And zoning wise, this is currently,
I'd have to check. I believe this is the city of, is this Irondale? Yeah, I'd have to check with Township of Irondale.
Do we know what their lots, I mean, if somebody bought it and I want to build a house, they don't have a 5 acre, we don't know what the restriction is? Don't know.
How about a storage shed?
Yeah, a storage unit with windows.
There is residential development right across the way that looks like a plat.
Correct.
So it gives you some idea of what this city or the township was interested in, and that passed muster. Looking at the sizes here, it looks like you could have about one lot. 22 to 28,
Yeah.
I think Gary's accurate. I think that's what it's worth. I don't think we get anything for pilt off of it. It's 2-3 acres, so maybe $6.
$12 if we're lucky, yeah.
That's not, the pilt isn't the issue.
I guess Doug, it's your district. I guess what your wishes are, I guess I defer to you because it's your district. I don't know. If it was in my district, I think I would probably have an opinion, but, I mean, you're more familiar with the area there.
yeah, and I don't, the Sagamore unit is built out, so I don't know that there would be any, future use of this piece, but I guess originally I thought it'd just go ahead with the sale to the DNR and be done, and we'll get something in return someday.
Would be kind of a buffer then? I mean, that's really the only reason they'd want it. There's not going to be any trail through there. It'd be kind of a buffer, I would imagine.
There's a road there that's separating it from the residential development.
And then on the map, if you can see the cursor there, access runs the property line right in here, kind of circles through, and you can kind of see their public launch so it goes right, right adjacent to it. They have a bridge that crosses the little creek here, and it kind of swings real close to the north property line. But I do believe that's what they want it for, as a buffer and to leave it wooded.
Right.
And it wouldn't affect the access to those other lots.
No, they're on the other side of the road, yep.
I'm good with it.
In terms of Commissioner Hoag's comment that we'll get it back from the DNR, realistically, I think we have many, many, many times. We've gotten land from the DNR through the Nature Conservancy or the Trust for Public Land in one of those transactions, and those have come to us with no cost. And then we use them for forestry, and sometimes we get pilt payments off of it. So it's not very often that we give something to the DNR. It's fairly common that we get something from them for a forestry.
And I believe that former Commissioner Teedy was able to, what he did on working on getting that 40 acres where the fire tower is, I believe that was for $1.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, we got that for $1.
We got that for $1, yeah. Okay.
I think working together gets you a lot further than,
Yeah.
spitting tacks at each other.
That's why I try to work hard with the Brainerd Dispatch and put out the good stories.
Can I help you, Renee? I'll help you there too.
I'm,
I'm right with
If
you.
Doug thinks, I think it sounds fine to me.
Any objections? Anybody thinking no? Okay, we will prepare the board action and bring it forward for your consideration.
So what's that process look like, Gary?
I believe we just have to have board resolution, and then we'll record a deed that transfers ownership.
Tim.
Pretty quick.
Yeah, it should go fairly quick. I think the only thing that'll take some time is I think we have to send it, it's funny, there's a DNR is gonna get it, but we have to send it to the DNR for the deed, because we gotta get it out of tax forfeited status. Yeah.
Yeah, we need their permission.
To give it to them.
So this might not happen for a year.
Oh, 4 years.
Well, yeah,
Do our work quickly, and then whatever takes them in the background.
Good.
And then the next item, Madam Chair, Commissioners, this came to us, this was probably going on a year. We own this parcel to the north here. This David and Carrie Goldman own, this is the property line currently. So they have this total acreage here. They get into their property right here off of McKay Road. And then they have constructed a boardwalk across kind of the swampy area over to this tip of this peninsula, which they own everything except for this tip, and that's tax forfeited property currently. So we brought this to you today to see if you're interested if we created just this legal description, chunk this area out of this 40 acres and sell this to the Gomans. Would be one of your options. One of your other options is you could just do nothing and let it be. We thought that we should do something about it, either maybe facilitate a sale of a portion of that property. And on this case, it's because it looks like it actually goes better with this ownership than us owning this little tip that goes up here. We did do a timber harvest this spring. If anybody's drove back, I can't think of the road that goes as a Delmar, I believe. But or what we could do is have Mr. and Mrs. Goldman take the boardwalk off our property and have them move it to the south. Those are kind of the three options you have. What we were hoping, and the Goldmans would be willing, is to purchase that little piece. We would carve that out and then have them consolidate it with the rest of theirs. We've estimated a property value of about $25,000. They're agreeable. If
I guess I'm at a loss, Gary. I always thought we had to put it on the auction.
Sure. 99% of properties do go to auction. We do have the ability to do direct sales if there are, if we believe that's an unbuildable or unaccessible property for a reasonable, assumption. In this case, there is no access to it unless you get on Gilbert and canoe or boat over to it. We also don't believe there's really enough building when you have to have so many feet back from the water and property. There's just not a realistic building envelope, so we believe this fits the criteria of a direct sale to the property owner in this specific case.
All this property is county property then? Or
The county property is up here, and then, so we got an 80 that would be up over here. So all of this is county property, even though it's, part of the lake bed of Gilbert. That's how some of the old legal description describes it, even though it's just kind of meandered property.
what prompted this again? What sparked this again today?
So we came across this when we were setting up the timber sale, and we did the timber appraisal here.
Right.
We were looking at this for some reserve or RMZ, and we noticed that this boardwalk had been built on tax forfeited property. So it came to, what should we do with this piece?
So Gary, did you say they're agreeable to that price?
Yeah. don't know that it makes any difference. I did reach out to Don Ryan, our attorney, just because he lives on the lake here. He's very active with the Lake Association, and kind of got his feeling on if there was, do you think there'd be a neighborhood, outcry if this, and he goes, you can't even, that gets so full of, choked up with weeds, you don't even really know what's even back there. He goes, he doesn't, that's just his opinion, but he didn't believe that there would be anybody that really would, have a big heartburn over this.
Well, I've been on a boat with Don Ryan back in there.
Of course.
And so, as long as he doesn't think there's going to be any outcry from the neighbors, I'm good with it.
When they built that boardwalk back here, did they ask for permission at all from the county?
I don't believe so. And I can't speak for them. Sometimes folks really don't know where that line is, when you're out there and you're building this, sometimes they get confused. Or they're just, they maybe, when they bought the property, maybe they've never checked and they just assume that they maybe have owned that. It's different, in different cases, but.
I just want to let you know, I built onto my deck, and I'm about 10 feet from the lake. I'm confused, so don't penalize me.
You're not
We'll have a new ordinance for you.
I'm okay with it. I guess I don't see what the issue is. I don't know. Rosemary, it's your district. What do you think?
I think we should sell it to them. They're
Okay.
willing to pay the price that you think it's worth, and
If you're okay with that, we would move forward with a direct sale with Goldman's then.
yeah, you can't get into it any other way, unless you said like with a boat,
Okay,
so.
Is that it?
that's it.
Can I ask
Yeah.
Gary another question, as long as you're here, Gary? And this kind of goes with what you're doing here. I remember, I don't know how many years, it's probably been 5 years ago that we kind of gave you direction that we wanted you to kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, consolidate, like sell some stuff, and I think you've been diligently doing that.
Public access.
How do you think you are as far as that? I mean, you think you're not done yet, but it probably is an ongoing thing, I would assume, right?
Yeah, very interesting. We have I just looked at the numbers this morning, we have about 58 30 acres or larger tracts out there that we have on a list to potentially divest
Okay.
our land holdings. I think, as I was counting, I think 11 of them are prime 40s or 30s that are almost all high ground that would be very attractive. That being said, there is some discussion that we'll need to come back here, and do we kind of continue to pause a little bit while the Supreme Court decision works its way into new legislation? We don't have to. We have current, legislation now that we can just continue to operate on. But would it be something that we want to, just kind of see how it goes for maybe a year and just kind of maybe pause to an extent? We still, have a robust timber management or harvest, that we do.
Right.
But I think we're about 103,000 acres currently on tax forfeit or county ownership. It used to be 105. There's a big chunk of land up northern Crow Wing that potentially would even us back up to around 105 if that's something we want to entertain in the future.
What do you think?
I think a year pause is a good idea for the reasons that Gary cited. The other thing is, I think it might not be terrible for our staff to just get a breather to catch up. We're trying hard to make investments with these proceeds, and I think we have a full plate here that'll spill over into next year.
Right.
And so I don't think it's a terrible idea. We can pace this at whatever pace we wish to go.
Right.
And I do think Gary is wise to say we probably need to know what the outcome of the Hennepin County case is going to be. That will affect our decision about which parcels and whether or not we wish to divest. There is no obligation to divest.
No.
There are implications from that case. So I think his advice is good advice. It does mean we would have maybe not as much excess proceeds in a year, for a year. I think that's actually not a terrible idea.
So then that would mean that we might not even have a land auction, or
Yep, potentially.
Possibly.
Still a timber auction, but not
Yeah.
necessarily a land sale.
It'd be interesting how quick, I've heard, oh.
I'd be okay with that, pausing for a year, but I still would like us to, I don't know, I look at it like that one up in Doug's area, that little sliver there, it's kind of almost like cleanup. You're just cleaning up this mess, and, you know, and you haven't talked about how things are coming on the corners, like you're doing, you know, the surveying. I haven't heard that discussion for a long time. How is that coming? I mean, I don't mean to drag it on, but I guess I think we...
No, it's coming along very well. Frankly, we are going to tee that up and have a discussion, I want to say November or December, whenever we could get back to you guys, but we have a contract and we are doing, you can kind of say county cleanup. You think you're not going to like it or you're going to laugh, one or the other. I think the remonumentation of Crow Wing County started in 81 or 82, if my understanding is correct, when we had county surveyor here and they started that process. I can easily tell you now, worked with 4 different surveyors as county surveyors. We have a contract surveyor now. We don't have one township that's completely done since 1982. And that's under my watch too. I came to this board a few years ago and said, I got a 7-year plan to get this done.
Yeah.
And we still are probably it's probably a 9-year plan, but we have a process and identified now we are finishing 100% township by township by township. And what we're gonna, this dovetails into, once we have a township completed, do we have the appetite to redraw in the lines and tighten them very tight to certified corners throughout? Because that may, you know, cause some issues.
Yeah.
But it's going very well. We're making progress with the contract, and it's an ongoing thing.
And I want to point out one other thing for the board is you know, I just think it's important for us to constantly, and I know this job will never be done, is to clean up, either selling some land that we don't need and maybe acquiring some that makes sense for us to have, and then to clean up some of these lines. And what you know, and I don't mean to catch you flat-footed, but on like the parcel up in Breezy Point, which I had a call and I talked to you and Chris about where, you know, there's a sliver there. I mean, when somebody goes to sell that house, in reality, I don't know if they really have, their property doesn't go all the way to Pelican. And so that's a example of something that somehow I wish we could get that cleaned up. I don't know if anybody's ever heard about this.
And we could pull it up, but it's a great, I want to say kind of case study, because we went over, I want to say into lawyer land, that when you have a plat and you plat property, you know, there's an owner of every described piece. And even when it forfeited, this was a common ownership one, but it never was set up that way in the tax rolls. So instead of everybody, the 60 owners of the plat, getting a piece to pay on that, it was its own, and then whether they had a homeowner association or not, nobody paid the tax on their beach area, even though it's kind of swampy, but it went forfeited. So now it's just been hanging out there since the 80s. With discussions with a couple different attorneys, that interest, even though we have forfeited and took it, there's some opinion that they still have the right through the platting process that they can use it and they still have benefit because it's declared as such on the plat. It's really, I'm like, you know, I don't know that I agree with that, but we're still kind of working through that's really deep dive on that one, because that's why it's taken us so long, because I don't know that we've liked the answer, not that we always do, but you ever go to the doctor and go, I'm gonna go get a second opinion? So we're kind of doing that. Just to make sure on that one, we got what, we think is right.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I got a question now that Paul has brought this up. On this one on Gilbert, would we allow, if he owned that land on Gilbert, would we have allowed him to build a boardwalk on that?
Oh, that's a
That
good
would have been all with, so if we're selling it to him, we're not selling him something that isn't, he would have been able to do exactly what he's doing there, so it isn't like, okay, that's all I needed to know.
Yeah, wouldn't that be government for you? Buy that from us, and then once you buy it, you can't have your boardwalk.
That's why I'm thinking, I kind of understand that part of it.
Sure.
Make them remove it then.
Madam Chair, that is all we have for you today. If you have any questions for anybody remaining.
Madam Chair, if I might, a motion to adjourn. Whoa.
Good thing that coffee cup was empty before it tipped over.
Who's that in Breezy that calls it that?